As my fingers danced across the screen of my phone, a chime heralded the arrival of a message that was destined to topple the world as I knew it. The words, a delicate concoction of amour and promises, were not crafted for my eyes, a mistake, a slip, a digital misstep that MIA had never intended for me, her husband, to intercept. In those few seconds, the phone grew heavy with the weight of an imminent avalanche, and I stood at the precipice of a truth I never wanted to unearth. Revenge, at that moment, was a distant siren's call, but it would soon become my obsessive symphony. That evening, as twilight bled into the living room, cloaking our suburban fortress in shadows, MIA glided past, a phantom with averted eyes. I noticed the careful way she angled her phone, a portal to her secret world, as if it were a fragile secret now shared with everyone but me. My name is Alex, and until that fateful message, I was merely a man married to the beat of routine and the warmth of familiar arms. As I now sat across from the love of my life, her laughter a melody I no longer recognized, I wrestled with the serpents of doubt coiling in my stomach. Every hushed conversation she buried into her phone, each unexplained late return from work, fanned the embers of my distrust into a conflagration that threatened to consume us both. My confidant and brother-in-arms, Eddie, observed my torment from across the office, where we toiled over blueprints and deadlines, our professional sanctuary from personal demons. Little did I know that he, too, was grappling with his own relationship fears, a mirror to the disquiet that gnawed at my heart. I had convinced myself that a surprise getaway would mend the fractures, would cauterize the wound that neither of us dared acknowledge. It was to be an adventure, a chance to rekindle, or so I hoped. Yet, as we drifted through picturesque scenes, her dispassion became the villain of our story, tearing the final threads of my denial asunder. Our return was silent, punctuated only by the unspoken chasms between us. It was then that I braced myself against the moral quagmire, summoning a private investigator into our midst, a stranger who would soon confirm the ghosts that haunted our halls. The stage is set, dear reader, for a revelation so meticulously orchestrated that it would make the playwrights of yore weep in admiration. Let me guide you through a tale of betrayal, of a heart scorned and a vengeance so sweetly served that it will linger on your palate long after the final act. Join me on this journey of shattered illusions and reclaimed dignity. You've only just glimpsed behind the curtain. Time crept forward at a cruel pace in the days that followed our hollow pilgrimage through a landscape of lost connections. The more I yearned for normalcy, the more elusive it became. I buried myself in my work, each line of code a refuge that offered me solace from the storm brewing within the walls of what was once our sanctuary. The project, at least, made sense when nothing else did. It was binary, predictable, and within my control, not at all like the chaos of my own emotions. The rhythm of my typing was a metronome to my inner turmoil, a beat that seemed to echo the erratic pulse of suspicion. It was during one of these late nights, slouched over the keyboard, that the ticks of the clock grew louder, resonating with the ticking bomb of my marriage. For each moment MIA failed to account for, each hurried whisper she thought I didn't notice, my heart sank deeper into the quagmire of dread. Conversations at home turned into a minuet of evasion. MIA, once an open book, had become a cipher, her words a series of codes I could no longer decipher. She was still present physically, but there was an undoubted chasm between us, one filled with the silence of unsaid truths and rehearsed smiles. I caught her more than once, her gaze drifting away mid-conversation, as if she were anchored to a distant shore. It was Eddie who finally broke through the monastic silence of my existence. "You're killing yourself, man," he said one evening, commandeering my attention away from the glowing screen that had become my only companion. We were the last souls in the office, as had become our custom. His intervention was a testament to our history, the shared experiences that overcame his usual respect for personal boundaries. We were two sides of the same coin, he, with his fear of being ensnared, and I, now suffocating in the very trap he dreaded. You need a break, Eddie insisted, a knowing look in his eyes. Come out with me tonight. Let's find that old spark, the one that's not about pixels and parameters. I hesitated, torn between the impulse to discover what MIA was concealing and the longing to rediscover a piece of myself that was perhaps lost among the ruins of our fading love. But Eddie was persuasive, and perhaps he was right. Maybe facing my fears head-on was the catalyst I needed. Thus, I found myself in the growing cacophony of a bar, surrounded by the pulse of music and a crowd blissfully ignorant of my internal tempest. Eddie leaned in, his voice barely cresting the noise as he shared his latest romantic entanglement. She's great, Alex, but it's that same old story, right? Commitment is a heavyweight. His words echoed within me, a harsh reminder of the irony that my once steadfast commitment was now the very shackle I was desperate to break. I couldn't help but hear the resonance of Mia's restlessness in his fear of ties that bind too tightly. It struck a chord within me, ringing with the harmony of betrayal. It was a night that mirrored the contradictions of my life, seeking solace in a crowd, chasing freedom while feeling trapped, and finding companionship in loneliness. Eddie's shared apprehension was a common thread but spun from a different yarn, his tapestry a completely different hue from the one that had been my comfort and now was my shroud. Our glasses clinked in the dim light, toasting to the unknowable future. The clink of glass sounded with finality, a period at the end of a sentence yet to be written. Our laughter was a facade that masked our fears, a farce I played my part in all too well. With each passing second, the night weighed heavier upon me, a sober reminder that no amount of distraction could erase the indelible mark of a crumbling marriage. And so, under the flickering neon lights, I made my decision. It was time to seek the truth, regardless of the pain it might unveil. It was time to lift the veil and look the monster of betrayal in its hollow eyes. I would not falter. I would not retreat into the seductive comfort of ignorance. Tomorrow, I would step into the light, irrespective of the shadows it might cast. Tomorrow came with a vengeance, a sunrise that felt like a spotlight on the stage of my disquiet. The hues of dawn did little to alleviate the weight of my decision made under the neon anesthesia of the previous night. Sleep had been a stranger, and as I sat at our kitchen table nursing a strong, black coffee, I couldn't help but feel like an actor learning his lines for a play he never auditioned for. MIA floated through the room with her usual morning grace, but each movement seemed to carry a hidden subtext I could no longer ignore. Her casual kiss on my cheek was a script of normalcy I knew we'd both abandoned. She was oblivious to the night's transformation within me. The resolve that had settled in my bones was invisible to her, a secret armor against an insidious foe. Big day at the office? She queried with a sweetness that once would have been genuine but now felt like an artificial sweetener in our daily brew of small talk. Yeah, I replied, the word tasting like ash on my tongue. Eddie's dragging me out tonight to clear my head. That's good, she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. You work too hard. If only she knew that working hard was about to take on a new meaning entirely. The day passed in a blur of keystrokes and meetings, Eddie throwing me concerned glances every now and then as if trying to read the subtitles of my silence. When the office began to empty, and the echo of departure filled the space, Eddie approached my desk with the same resolve he used to close deals. Ready to forget the world exists for a few hours? He asked, a grin plastered on his face that faltered at my grim nod. The bar was a comfortable haunt, draped in the familiarity of happy hours past. But tonight, the ambience was stifled by the specter of my mission. Eddie's first beer was halfway to victory when he leaned in close, an elbow anchored on the bar. You know, Alex, every time I'm with someone new, I'm already looking for an exit. It's like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff, and commitment is the ocean below. It's beautiful, but I can't swim, and I'm afraid of drowning. The words were meant to be light, but they anchored deep in the pit of my gut. Here was Eddie, my foil, fearing the plunge while I was already submerged, struggling for air in the treachery of deceit. As opposed to me, I mused wryly, already in the water, realizing there might be predators beneath the surface. Ouch! Eddie winced sympathetically, taking a sip of his drink. That deep? Huh, you have no idea, I muttered, the words barely a whisper. Eddie didn't press further, and for that, I was thankful. The night had to play out without the weight of confessions. The veil of ignorance was a flimsy curtain, and I was the man behind it, pulling levers, ready to cast it aside. As the bar's lights dimmed and the music swelled, I watched the carefree dance of patrons lost in the moment. A pang of envy touched me, those so free from the shackles of secrets and lies. For them, the night was an escape, a pleasurable reprieve. For me, it was the eye of the storm. Closing time found Eddie and me staggering slightly, a bit more from the weight of our thoughts than the alcohol, I suspect. The frigid night air slapped me sober as we spilled out onto the street. Thanks, Eddie, I said genuinely. I needed this. Anytime, friend, he clapped me on the back. You know where to find me. I watched him hail a cab and disappear into the night. I stood alone on the pavement, a man on the precipice of action. The chill that seeped into my bones was a stark reminder of the isolation betrayal had ushered into my heart. With a deep breath that hung white in the air, I turned towards home, towards a confrontation I wasn't sure I was ready for but knew was inevitable. It was time to confirm my suspicions. It was time to hire a private investigator. The shadows of the night clung to me as I walked, a prophetic cloak for the truth-seeker, the heartbroken, the about to betrayed. In that walk, in each step, I felt a transformation, no longer the man who existed before the neon lights, but the phoenix who would rise from the ashes of his own naivety. Tonight, I had toasted to the unknowable future, and tomorrow, I would face it head-on. The early morning was still shrouded in darkness as I slipped between the sheets next to MIA, her breathing deep and even in sleep. I lay there wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling, grappling with a stark truth. The woman I loved harbored a secret life, one that I was on the cusp of unraveling. The looming silence of our bedroom threatened to suffocate me, and in that silence, a plan began to take shape. In a desperate bid to reclaim the narrative of our relationship, I resolved to orchestrate a romantic getaway, a weekend retreat to the coastal town where MIA and I had first pledged our futures to each other. The irony of returning to the start to potentially end things was not lost on me, but the gesture felt necessary. It would be a litmus test for the state of our union, an attempt to rekindle a flame I feared had been extinguished by another. Morning light bled through the blinds as MIA stirred, her hand instinctively reaching out to my side of the bed. I feigned sleep, not yet ready to engage in another round of hollow pleasantries. When I finally awoke, showered, and dressed, MIA greeted me with her usual carefree smile as if the world were as it always had been. I was thinking, I started, my voice steady despite the tumult within, we could use a getaway, just the two of us. How about this weekend? We can go back to Seaview, walk on the beach, have dinner at the Sea Glass, like old times. Mia's expression faltered for just a fraction of a second, her eyes clouding with something unreadable before she masked it with enthusiasm. That sounds lovely, Alex. It's been too long since we've done something spontaneous. Her words echoed with a hollow ring, and I couldn't tell if the spontaneity she spoke of was a yearning for our past or a desire for her present escapes. The drive to Seaview was a mix of silence and forced conversation. The coastline stretched out like an open road in a forgotten song, its beauty lost to the gravity of my intention. Our hands intertwined at times, a physical connection that no longer represented the unity of our hearts. Seaview was as picturesque as ever, a postcard-perfect setting to a couple in distress. The quaint bed and breakfast greeted us with its charming warmth, a stark contrast to the cold dread settling over me. We strolled along the beach, the waves whispering secrets to the shore as I watched MIA through new eyes, wondering where her thoughts truly wandered. Dinner at the Sea Glass was a reenactment of happier times, the ambience a dimly lit stage for our play of normalcy. MIA laughed at all the right moments, wine loosening her demeanor, her guard slipping ever so slightly as the night wore on. Back in our room, as MIA slept, every breath she took seemed to whisper a name that was not mine. I lay awake, adrift on a sea of betrayal and heartache. The weekend had not bridged the gap between us. It had highlighted it, a glaring chasm that no amount of shared history could conceal. I slipped out of bed, pulling on my jeans and a hoodie against the late-night chill. On the balcony, the ocean's roar was a fitting soundtrack to my turmoil. The romantic getaway had confirmed my worst fears. There was no flame left to rekindle. It had been snuffed out, replaced by an ember of deception glowing in the dark. It was then I decided to act, to move beyond the role of the victim. The pain of betrayal demanded truth, and I would have it. It would mean sinking to measures I had never thought myself capable of, but uncertainty was no longer an option. Tomorrow, I would call the private investigator. Tomorrow, the final act would begin. The dawn betrayed no secrets as morning light spilled into our room, casting long shadows over the remnants of what was supposed to be a romantic reconciliation. MIA lay there, a silhouette of the woman I thought I knew, while I stood on the balcony, the decision hardening in my chest like cooling lava. With the clarity of the morning came the realization that I could not allow this charade to continue. The drive back home was a silent one. I dropped MIA off and told her I needed to head straight to the office to catch up on some work that now served as a cover for the unraveling of my personal life. Once alone in the sterile confines of my car, my fingers hesitated above the dial pad of my phone. The number of the private investigator, a man recommended by a colleague for entirely different matters, seemed to burn into the screen. I dialed it before I could change my mind. The voice that greeted me was curt, professional, and devoid of judgment. I explained the situation with as little emotion as my voice could muster. Terms were agreed upon, the coldness of commerce shielding me from the magnitude of my actions. The PI assured me I would have answers soon, perhaps sooner than I wanted them. I hung up the phone, a leaden feeling in my gut. There was no turning back now. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of work provided a much-needed distraction. MIA seemed oblivious, ensnared in her own web of lies and half-truths, while I waited, the mask of normalcy becoming more oppressive with each passing day. Then came the envelope. No markings, just the weight of its contents confirming my fears before a single photo was revealed. The evidence was damning: dates, times, places, and faces all meticulously captured in a series of photographs and reports that tore through the veneer of my marriage. Each image was a fresh stab, a visceral reminder of my insufficiency and Mia's duplicity. How could I have been so blind? The hurt gave way to anger, then solidified into resolve. I would not let this deceit be the end of my story. The planning of the revenge was methodical, a reflection of the meticulous nature that had served me so well in my career. A surprise promotion party, nothing outlandish considering my recent professional successes, which had, ironically, been driven by the need to escape my crumbling personal life. The guest list was crafted with precision: colleagues, friends, family, and of course, MIA, who believed the entire ruse. I saw to every detail, ensuring it would be a night to remember. Or rather, a night impossible to forget. As the days edged closer to the event, an internal battle waged within me. There was the innate sense of justice, the need to expose the lie, against the stark reality of the impending public spectacle. Yet a deep, unyielding part of me yearned for the truth to be laid bare for all to see. MIA would have her escape, but it would be under the stark light of revelation. The night before the party, I sat alone in our living room, surrounded by the shadows of a life I had once believed to be true. The house was silent but for the ticking of the clock, an apt metaphor for the countdown to the impending denouement of my marriage. I knew the coming day would change everything. I had built a pyre of truth and, by sunrise, I was ready to set it alight. It was time for the final act to begin. The morning of the party dawned, a day of reckoning cloaked in the guise of celebration. I rose early, my rest disturbed not by anticipation of the event itself but by the consequence it would bear. My routine was mechanical, each step executed with a numbness that belied the turmoil within. As I tied the knot of my tie, a sartorial noose, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. The man staring back was a foreigner in his own life. The betrayal had not just stolen the sanctity of my marriage, it had begun to erode my sense of self. Yet amid the erosion, a new resolve had taken root. The venue was a chic industrial loft, its exposed brick and high beams lending an air of understated sophistication. I arrived ahead of the guests to ensure every detail aligned with the meticulous plan. The caterers were arranging hors d'oeuvre, the bartender stocked the shelves, and the projector was neatly ensconced in the shadows, its presence unnoticed but primed for the pivotal role it was to play. Colleagues and friends filtered in, their congratulations and pats on the back a surreal prelude to the night's true purpose. I received their well wishes with a practiced smile, the weight of the envelope's contents an anchor in my pocket. MIA entered, radiant and unaware, her smile bright as she embraced me. The facade of warmth and affection between us was a grotesque pantomime, yet necessary to maintain until the appointed hour. The sight of her, so carefree, so blissfully ignorant, stoked the embers of my indignation. As the room filled and the clamor of conversation swelled, I kept one eye on the clock. The moment was drawing near. Eddie arrived, his easy charisma on display as he mingled, occasionally shooting me knowing looks that were meant to bolster but only served to remind me of the impeding chasm that would soon divide my life into before and after. Finally, it was time. With a clink of glass, I called for attention, the room dimming in anticipation of accolades and acknowledgments. My heart thudded heavily, in sync with the quiet whir of the projector as it blinked to life. I began with gratitude for everyone's support, my career triumphs projected in vivid detail behind me. But as the slides transitioned, the room's energy shifted palpably. There they were, the photos from the PI, woven into a narrative no one expected. MIA and her clandestine lover, frozen in time, their secret moments on public display. I could hear the sharp intake of breaths, the low murmurs of disbelief, as realization struck the crowd in waves. And MIA, her expression morphed from confusion to horror. The color drained from her face, her hands trembling, clutching at an escape that wouldn't come. In that moment, I saw a reflection of the pain I had endured, now mirrored in her own eyes. The room's reaction was a muffled symphony of shock. Yet amid the chaos, I stood still, the eye of an emotional hurricane. My actions, driven by hurt and the desire for justice, had laid bare the truth. The fallout was immediate and absolute, the final vestige of our shared life crumbling beneath the weight of public revelation. I had set out to unmask the lie, but as I watched MIA, floundering under the scrutiny, I wondered if the price of truth was one we both paid too dearly. The silence that swept through the room was suffocating, each face etched with a story of its own reaction. Whispers cut through the air, a dizzying crescendo of pity, shock, and morbid fascination. I stood before them all, an architect of a grand exposure that now seemed to dwarf even the towering walls of the loft. Eddie's eyes met mine, a flash of sadness in them that betrayed his usual nonchalance. I wondered if he was considering his own fleeting romances, ephemeral as smoke, and how this tableau of betrayal might echo in his own pursuit of love. Samantha, poor Samantha, stood on the fringes, her normally bright eyes clouded over with a storm of conflict. She avoided my gaze, the weight of her prior silence now a palpable barrier between us. MIA finally found her voice, a cracked whisper that struggled to gain volume. "Alex, Why? She murmured, her words a dagger to the remnants of my resolve. Standing in the eye of the storm I had conjured, I felt a coldness descend upon me, a chill that spoke of finality. Because I had to know, I said, my voice steady, I had to know if the life we built was real, or just another one of your stories. The crowd receded into a blur as I focused on MIA, the only other real presence in this theater of our undoing. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming the narrative, the years of my life that I had invested in us. The hardness in her eyes told me she understood. Somewhere beneath the humiliation and shock, there was an acknowledgement of the reckoning she had gambled away. I wanted to rage at her, to tear down the walls and let the world see how her betrayal had hollowed me out. But there, with every eye upon us, I realized that such an outburst would only leave me more diminished. So I stood stoic, our shared pain suspended like a photograph in the still air. Colleagues began to shuffle uncomfortably, realizing they were intruders upon a deeply private tragedy. Some offered awkward condolences, their eyes darting away as they searched for an excuse to leave. The evening had started as a celebration of my success, my ascension. It was to be an epitaph to my unwavering trust, sacrificed at the altar of truth. The room slowly emptied, leaving MIA and me adrift in the hollow aftermath. Our lives, once entwined, were now unraveling before us. In the following silence, I approached her. There was no love left in my gaze, but a complex tapestry of sorrow and resignation. We can't undo what's been done, I said quietly. I think it's clear to both of us what happens next. The talk of divorce was a thin veil over the depth of our fracture. We would untangle our lives, separate paths from the wreckage of a relationship that could no longer sustain the weight of its broken trust. As the last guests filtered out, murmurs and hushed tones their lingering soundtrack, I prepared to exit the stage of my own dramatic play, the final act complete. The curtain had fallen on the life MIA and I had once planned, and in its wake, I felt the first stirring of a daunting freedom. The undeniable reality of starting over hung in the air, as unpredictable and fickle as the winds of change. The future loomed, unwritten and uncertain, but it was a future where honesty, no matter how painful, would be the cornerstone.